gentlemen, it's that time. Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the Don Miller Show podcast. Let me just say this real quick. Subscribe and like. Tell your friends. Do that for me, man. Just tell your friends to listen to the black guy screaming and hollering. But, not going to scream and holler tonight. I'm going to try to engage in the lively art of conversation slowly. Books don't bite. Stay with me tonight. We are going to have a conversation that I have been waiting to have for a while. I got a message from a young guy the other day, and he wanted to know, over the years he's followed the show both on radio and podcast, and he wanted to know why I don't spend much time talking about Black History Month during the month of February. And he was like, Mr. Don, just, I never hear you really talk about it. And I was telling him, I was like, hey, listen, well, you have to be careful when someone designate a time and a space or a period of time for you to engage in your own history. Black history is American history. And I just want to say this, and I want people to listen to me. Black history is American history. The history of black people that were brought here on slave ships is the history of America, Phil. Shout out to Phil, the podcast doctor. Hey, man. Yo. The history of black people, Africans who were brought here against their will, shackled and chained on slave ships, is American history. And I think we have to understand that. And to do so, we have to be comfortable spending time and understanding how many times that the history of foundational black people has been distorted, oftentimes by us. So I talked to the young guy, and he was going on, and as a reader, I think it's important that we examine everything all the time. And we have found ourselves often as black people in this country allowing our history to be presented to us by those who may have a ulterior motive in distorting our history. So I don't like to spend a lot of time on it because black history is American history. Now, let's be clear. What happened with the slave trade and slaves being brought to this country was horrible and it was horrendous. But slavery is white history. How we survived it is black history and where we have come to this point. But the level of distortion that I came across as a kid, I'll never forget. Every year, every time there was Black History, we had this list of people, Phil, and they were all great people, and they all did great work. Louis H. Latimer, whose patent was stolen, Garrett T. Morgan, and we've heard about all these people over the years. And that was all great. But my question, as a guy who enjoyed reading from the time I learned to read, I always also enjoyed investigating conversations. And I found myself really confused in wanting to know more. So I went deep, and I went to the library, and I went to libraries outside of my environment to really get a better understanding of what was being presented to me. There's an amazing book by David Coyle called The Ordeal of the American Presidency. I want people we're going to take our time today, get a pen or get your phone out. I want you to save some of these books there. We're going to present several books tonight because I think it's very important that we understand where this conversation is going and why I came to the place that I've come to. So The Ordeal of the American Presidency by David Coyle. And David Coyle writes that when Abraham Lincoln was running for president, oftentimes he was referred to by his opponents, political opposition, as a Negro.
What?
And he was referred to this because, first of all, he had Negro features. They talked about his hair oftentimes in many of these writings, and his skin tone. And so when I first came across that, I was like, wait a minute, this can't be so. And as I started to read more and more, I didn't realize that why would I not think that there would be mulattoes growing to prominence in that era? White men were sleeping with slave women often and all the time. So why would I think that Abraham Lincoln, or even for that matter, Thomas Jefferson or Andrew Jackson, both of which have been referred to in great writings. There's a wonderful book. I want people to, it's a wonderful book called The Johnny Papers. I also came across the Johnny Papers as a young guy. And the Johnny Papers talks about Thomas Jefferson being the son of a half-breed squaw and a mulatto father. The Johnny Cake Papers of Shepherd Tom. Write that down. You want to go get it. Most of these books you can find easily. So when I started to read about Lincoln and do more research, and Lincoln, mom, Nancy Hanks, was thought to have had a personal relationship with a Negro slave, former slave. And if you go read J.A. Rogers, who was a wonderful author, J. Augustus Rogers, who writes oftentimes about that era, just presented some amazing conversation over the time that just kind of really made me want to know more and more and more. There's also a book, The Hidden Letters, The Hidden Lincoln Letters. Now, Abraham Lincoln had a law partner at the time who pretty much really felt like, and Herndon, he wrote a book as well, he pretty much felt like that Lincoln was always a Negro, and that he acted oftentimes when the conversation about race came up, that he had something to hide. So go look at that, go find that book, The Hidden Lincoln. It talks about his mom and his life, and often when you read these books, you'll find that the reference to him being a Negro was said oftentimes, or mulatto, whatever you want to call it, in that era. They talked about it a lot. And
what?
I was stunned, right?
Don, why was this never taught in school?
I'm going there. Just stay with me.
I'm scared. I'm scared.
And so Abraham Lincoln, if you read anything about Lincoln, this is why I'm not a giant fan of Barack Obama, but of course, as you know, Barack Obama was a big follower of Abraham Lincoln and his writings. I contend that he was, because he too was a mulatto, and in his studying Lincoln in depth, he found that Lincoln was a mulatto as well. Abraham Lincoln had a close confidant and a manservant by the name of William Slade. And if you go and read William Slade's writings, oftentimes, and not the writings, but in the depiction of Lincoln, he leans and gravitates toward Lincoln being of mulatto descent as well. Why aren't we taught that in school? Well, I think oftentimes we are not taught a lot of things because the narrative is to keep one in a certain mindset feel. And so we have, they give us what they want us to give, whoever's directing the narrative. That's why it's so important to direct your own narrative. And again, I would have loved as a kid to even think that a president of the United States might have had some blood like me in him. But who would that benefit at the time? So the reality is, I just think people need to seriously grab onto the fact that books don't bite, right? And when you understand that books don't bite, you would be stunned what you can find. One of the things that William Slade said, that he knew there was something about Lincoln's origin as he traveled with Lincoln oftentimes, but he always was very dismissive about that, as I understand why he would be at the time. So I think it's important that we kind of really dig deep into our history, stop letting people, and I'm not saying white people hear this from us, I'm saying there was no benefit to share certain information at the time. And, going back to a real quick point I want to make, I was talking to a young guy the other day, Phil, and he was telling me how horrible it was that black people, we're talking about Black History Month. We smoked a cigar and talking about Black History Month. He's a college graduate of Bethune-Cookman University. And we were talking about just, he was like, man, white people never gave us opportunity. We had to do everything. We had to start our own schools. And white people hate black people. We've heard that. Last couple of weeks ago on the show, I talked about a young lady who was going through some trials and tribulations, and she felt that it was a good idea to blame it on white people. The fact of the matter is, it's very important that we spend some time finding out who we are. And I think it's better if we find out who we are as opposed to let other people tell us who we are. So I go back to the young guy. He was talking about these schools, and he was saying that, he went to black college, and we had to make our own schools and blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, well, young man, you familiar with Howard University? He was like, yeah, I know all about Howard. It's a historic black college. I said, do you know who Howard was, Mr. Howard, who started Howard? And he was like, yeah, he's probably a black guy. And I was like, nope. And he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, nope. Then we talked about Spelman University, a historic university in Atlanta, Georgia. I said, do you know who Laura Spelman was? And he was like, oh, I don't know. Can you tell me? I was like, yeah, her name was Laura Spelman Rockefeller, and the Rockefellers funded Spelman University. You go to Fisk University. Fisk University was set forth and financed early on by Colonel Fisk, who was back in the day, there was this thing called the Freedmen's Bureau, and many of them were people who had served in the military, white men, and they went about the country establishing institutions of higher learning for black people. So I think it's important that we really dig deep and ask a lot of questions as opposed to letting someone tell us and give us the agenda. And I think we only do that. So I got turned off by the history that I was being given early on. I was like, this is some bullshit. Excuse me, Phil, for cussing on the show, but I cussed, okay? And it was amazing to me when I started to read about General Clinton Fisk. And people like Clinton Fisk and Laura Spelman Rockefeller, Littleton Morgan, Morgan State University, I think that's in Baltimore. And so you go down the list of these places, and Bethune-Cookman University. Phil, you know who Cookman was?
No.
Alfred Cookman, a white Methodist minister who teamed up with who I think is one of the greatest people of all time, Mary McLeod Bethune, and building Bethune-Cookman University in beautiful Daytona Beach. So I think a lot of our history or the support that we got from people who didn't look like us, I think it was set up like that, Phil, because I'm amazed at how many young people think that every white person hated us in that era. And there's no benefit to even feeling like that or thinking like that. But in the history that we have been given, we were given the history of inventors, some educators, but mostly people who built stuff. And that's great. I think that's amazing. George Washington Carver is an amazing, amazing person in history. There's so many of them. There's so many to name. But we all knew the names in third grade. And so when I hear these names, and I never heard of any, Phil, did you hear growing up of any white people that helped black people?
Not like that.
So
no.
you don't know the name Wendell Phillips?
Nope, never heard.
Wendell Phillips was an abolitionist who did great work. And I'm not pumping white people up on Black History Month. I am saying to black people, know your own history. Stop letting people tell you your history. And one of the things I came across years ago, and I had to go dig up this stuff. I've been reading this for years. There was a guy by the name of Julius Rosenwald, and I knew the name as a kid growing up in Chicago. I think Julius Rosenwald was involved with Sears and Roebuck. He had a philanthropic. He had a big organization that did great philanthropic work, and the Carnegie Corporation. Rosenwald founded the General Education Board, which was actually funded by J.D. Rockefeller. And this money, in 1920-21, documented proof says that Rockefeller provided $24.9 million to HBCUs and individual black scholars. So 24.9 million in 2021 was equivalent to $400 million today.
Woo!
But why don't we get that, Phil? Why don't we know any of this?
I think it's intentional.
It's 100% intentional, and I think it's our fault that we don't know. So, look, I support Black History Month. That's amazing. Henry Lyman Morehouse University. Who was that, Phil?
These are all HBCUs, right?
Yeah, he's a white dude. Morehouse was a white guy.
Oh, for real? Mm-hmm. See, I didn't know.
I just think it's important that we spend time on our own history. You look at the Jewish community, nobody has to tell them anything about their history. They know it because they didn't let people infiltrate in positioning the historical facts that their children receive. They know their history. You look at the Asian community. Many communities have not allowed other people to give them their history. And I think it's important that if we're going to celebrate 1 month, which I think is, I don't get that, but it's important that we understand how our history has been held back from us, how our history is somewhat of a mystery, Phil.
Yeah.
You know, and it's amazing. It's amazing when I talk to young people, many of which went to black colleges, and they don't even know who the founder of their colleges are. And how does that happen? And it happens because it is a direct push to keep it from you. So please, look, if you're going to celebrate this month, that's fine. But at least take some time this month and go read. Go read something. Go pick up something, not just, something that somebody else told you to read. Or, of course, we all know George Washington Carver and many of those names. One of the greatest books I ever read was The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. It's a great read. How many people, Phil, have you read it?
I have not.
Okay, and it's a 100-year-old piece, or any of the Booker T. Washington writings. I just think it's important that we read. This show, I come in here because I'm trying to get people to read books because I read a lot of books, and I think everybody should read books. And I think you should read stuff that just ain't tossed out there to give you some information. I think you got to read. You got to know what it's about. I want to go back to the Johnny Cake Papers. The Johnny Cake Papers, Phil, put that up, is an amazing read, guys. I'm sure you probably can find it on Amazon. You can find most of the books we're talking about tonight on Amazon. Now, they're not the higher, they're not the books with 10,000 views. Nope, you're not going to get that in this, but you're going to get some knowledge. You're going to learn something. Hopefully you can learn something that you can share with your children or your grandchildren. One of my more interesting reads over the years was The Religious Instruction of the Negro by Charles Colcock Jones. And wow, what a read. When I found out that the Bible had been distorted and there was actually a slave Bible where books of the Bible had been taken out, and one of the forefronts of this book, this Bible that the Negro slaves were given was, "Slaves, obey your masters." That was the highlighted passage. And to tell that to someone who don't understand, how horrible is that? And I just think it's important that when we read with context and just have a better understanding of what you're engaging in, Phil.
Glenn commented, he said the Johnny Cake Papers.
Yes, the Johnny Cake Papers, Glenn. It'll tell you some stories, man, that I was amazed. I thought I was kind of on it for a minute, and I can tell you I was stunned by some of the stuff I read. So I'm going to read a question. I'm going to read a question from one of my listeners, and the question is this. Don, did most Southern whites own slaves? Well, thank you so much. That is from Kim. No, Kim, but only about 25% of white Southerners owned slaves. But there were many whites employed in the slave trade, like i.e. overseers and people who worked also on the plantations in an overseer or kind of security type scenario. But no, only 25% at the time, for a long period of time, of Southern whites owned slaves. But many of the children of the slave owners inherited their parents' chattel. Okay, chattel slavery was practiced in that era. So no, not all whites owned slaves. Did you know that, Phil?
Yeah, I did not.
Okay.
I thought all of them.
Another question from Tom. Tom says, slaves were slaves forbidden to read? No, there are a lot of places, my friend, that they were allowed to read. Okay, in 1740, under the South Carolina Negro Act, the law that most slave codes followed, this is an interesting one, and I'll tell you why. Slaves were given redacted versions of the Bible, I just said. They were allowed to read, but not to write for the most part. Okay. And so the redacted version of the Bible that were given them, but they also served in entrepreneurial environments, oftentimes bookkeepers. But when we get the message or we read about this, it's always distorted. I just want people to go read. And when you look at people like everybody knows about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, which was amazing. It's an amazing story. But I tell my white friends all the time, I think it's important that if you're going to engage with people who don't look like you, to my white friends, go read about black history. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt you to be able to have a better understanding of people and the plight of people. And I get it. You don't have to go all the way back to slavery, because I got to say this. Slavery has become an angle worked by many people now, a crutch, so to speak. And think about this. George Washington had a Negro son, and Thomas Jefferson publicly had Negro daughters.
What?
Yes, absolutely. And so I just want people to understand that we are living in a time where division is at the top of the conversation. They want people to be divided unlike ever before.
Why?
You tell me why. You know, more than I can't recall this gigantic push as a young dude who met my first white person, had a personal relationship with, when I probably was 14 or 15. Didn't know anybody white till I was 14 or 15. And I didn't see this level of division. People were nice. You know, you meet people, you talk to people, and now it's like everybody's against everybody. And I can tell you there are people who benefit, i.e. Al Sharpton and some people like that. They benefit greatly from this division. And we got to be better than that and bigger than that. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Ann O'Brien. Marxism is at the key of, oftentimes at the key of this. But we have to understand that we can't let the separatists win. We have to be bigger and better than that and move in a different direction. But I want people to go and read the writings of J.A. Rogers if you get a chance. Go get a book by J.A. Rogers. We're going to start our book club real soon. We used to have it on the radio when D'Amica Page was helping me. But I just got 100 things going on. But I just wanted to come in here and talk about this because somebody came to me about it and wanted to say, it's like, Don, man, you got to tell us, you know, talk about this because it's very important and you never talk about it. And I don't talk about it because I don't agree with a lot of it. I think the level of distortion and scams have been run, often at the hands of the Negro, to take advantage of the Negro. And that's unfortunate. And so we got to do better. But I want to go to a point that I was talking to Phil, talking to the guys in the studio earlier tonight. You go back to Rosa Parks. Anybody remember Rosa Parks, Phil? You remember Rosa Parks?
Yeah, man. She's the one who started everything.
Rosa Parks is known as the young black lady who would not give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama in the mid-'50s. She wouldn't get out of her seat and that started the Montgomery bus boycott. And Rosa Parks went on to become the name synonymous with the Montgomery bus boycott. But actually, it was not even Rosa Parks, Phil.
What?
It was a lady by the name of Claudette Colvin, who I'm pretty sure years ago, I definitely met her. Claudette Colvin, who I think she's still alive, living in New York, from Montgomery, Alabama, was pregnant on the bus with her friends, and she was 15 years old, and she would not. There's a great book. You got to read this book, Twice Toward Justice, Claudette Colvin, and that book is on Amazon for sure. Claudette Colvin, 15-year-old black girl on the bus, was asked to get out of her seat by a white lady. She's pregnant. She refuses to get out of her seat. Claudette, 15 years old and pregnant, was arrested and taken to jail. And that case was the catalyst for the desegregation of buses. That case, in the case, you want to read the case, the actual case is
Browder versus Gale?
Browder versus Gale. And Browder versus Gale went to the Supreme Court in 1956. And that case is the case that moved forward with the desegregation of buses. Buses at the time were segregated, black people, buses, trains, whatever, you had to go to the back. And you had to give up your seat if a white person got on. But let's get back to Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was the secretary for the NAACP office in Montgomery, Alabama. Fair-skinned, as they call fair-skinned, light-skinned black lady, well-dressed. And Claudette Colvin was a single 15-year-old having a baby out of wedlock who just happened to be dark-skinned. And in many writings, they refer to her as unattractive. So the civil rights activists at the time decided that she wouldn't be a good showing to put the case in front of. So they went and got Rosa Parks, the secretary at the NAACP. Rosa Parks' husband had a car at the time. I don't even know if she actually rode the bus.
What?
But it was black people who decided to go and get Rosa Parks. If you read Browder versus Gale, the Supreme Court decision, 1956, June 5th, 1956, Rosa Parks' name does not show up at all in Browder versus Gale, not at all. And so when you look at some of the things that have gone on, and this lady was not even a historical fact or figure until recently, when the story came about in 1921, I think it was 21. Her case was her record went away. 66 years later, the courts got rid of her record, but she had a record for 66 years. And in the case Browder versus Gale, it was her and some of her friends on that bus. But the black civil rights activists felt the fair-skinned Rosa Parks would be a better showing than the young black lady who was pregnant at the time, who actually was arrested for not giving up her seat. And this goes back to the conversation. A great attorney handled that case, one of the greatest lawyers of that era. When you start going down the list of Thurgood Marshall and a few other guys, Fred Gray, he was a state representative in Alabama, a minister, and an attorney, but really good attorney. He is also the lawyer who took on the Tuskegee Syphilis Project case, if you recall that, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's amazing. We just have to know our history. He's got a great book out, too. Fred Gray's book is, do you have the book over there? Bus Ride to Justice. Bus Ride to Justice by Fred Gray. You could go find that book and read that story. It's a great read. He was, when you go back to activism versus activism, then you realize how often people in the struggle were played. I got a lot of negative mail in my email a few weeks ago when I talked about what had Dr. King actually done. And there were people who took serious issue with me on that. But there were some really, when you look at who we have now, who are running to the microphones, who don't actually oftentimes have the best interests of the people that they're supposing to be advocating for, it is shameful. And especially coming out of an era like that, where if you raise your hand and say the wrong thing, your life was in jeopardy. But we had great people like Fred Gray and Thurgood Marshall, who came to Florida. And a lot of people don't know this. There was a sheriff in Lake County, Florida. There's a great book called Devil in the Grove. That's another good book you can read. Willis McCall was the sheriff in Lake County, Florida in the 60s, and he was a murderous tyrant who just blatantly killed people. And he shot 3 young men as he was allegedly taking them to jail. And two of them died. One of them lived and was able to tell the story. He was arrested. And Thurgood Marshall came down as Thurgood Marshall was with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the prosecution of Willis McCall. How many people know that story? Phil, you know that story?
Man, you dropping all these knowledge, man, on me, man. I haven't heard none of this.
Phil, pull up the book if you can, Devil in the Grove. I want people to go read that. I had a friend who passed away a few years ago. He was 90 years old. His name was Leon Hanley, and he was a practicing lawyer for almost 70 years in Central Florida. And he practiced in Orange, Osceola, and of course Lake County. And he was a white Florida cracker. One of my best friends. I love Leon. He was from Polk County, Florida, as they refer to it as the Imperial Polk County. And so I asked him. I said, Leon, when you had to go to Polk County to go to court, how was Willis McCall? He's like, everybody, even white people, didn't ever want to get on the bad side of Willis McCall. And he said, it was just, he was that type of murderous tyrant. And finally he came to his end. But the reality of it is, I just think it's important that we know our own history. The history of Ocoee, Florida, right where we're broadcasting from. The Ocoee Massacre. I hear people talk about it and refer to it, but I think we need to know about that. The history of Rosewood, within an hour and a half from where we broadcast from. But don't let someone else tell you the story. There's so much great reading material. Don, you need to teach a class. You're dropping great knowledge and nuggets tonight. Thank you so much, Drina. I just think we got to real pull back on people telling us our history. The history of the Ocoee Massacre right here. This studio, as a matter of fact, this studio is, if not on the land, it's really near the land where the massacre occurred. I know it's within a mile. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, the Ocoee Massacre right here in Ocoee, Florida, where we broadcast from.
Wow.
Rosewood, Florida is near as well, within an hour and a half. But again, these are stories that I think should be at the forefront, because there are so many, the perception of black people not doing well and not having, it has really been used, I think, subconsciously to create a thought pattern. And I'll give an example. So a young guy I was talking to the other day was talking about our ability to go vote. And he was like, man, they wouldn't even let us vote. And I had to explain to him, in the 1870s, black people were voting in Chicago, in many places. In the state of Illinois, black people gained the right to vote in 1870. And he was like, I didn't know that. Again, Phil.
I didn't know any of this stuff.
Again, we have to not allow our history to be a mystery. It's very important that we do our own research, stop letting people put it in front of us and tell us what to read. We read a lot of nonsense. We engage in a lot of ridiculousness. Just go read. There's so many good books. Phil, just stop putting the books up that I'm reading or I've read in the last. So, because it's just so many. I gave Phil my whole little. You got some?
No.
That's the books I sent you. Just put them up.
Oh, you want all of them?
Yeah, just start putting them up.
Okay. All right. Let's start this one. Okay.
Of course, we talked about the Johnny Cake Papers.
All right. We got this one.
Okay. The religious instruction of the Negro, and that is Charles Colcock Jones. Charles Colcock Jones wrote a piece that he passed around to white ministers at the time on how to instruct former slaves or slaves in terms of religion. So you can go read that, Charles Colcock Jones, The Religious Instruction of the Negro. The Hidden Lincoln Letters, that was William Herndon. William Herndon was the law partner of Abraham Lincoln. In this reading, he refers to Abraham Lincoln, his racial situation often. So go read that. As a matter of fact, you're going to find that really interesting. This book right here is the evidence that Lincoln was not born in lawful wedlock. And it's the sad story of Nancy Hanks, who was his mother. That's a really good read. If you want to read that, I think you can find that on Amazon as well. The Hidden Lincoln Letters is really a really good read. Just kind of gives you an idea of that time period and how Abraham Lincoln moved about the country, and how oftentimes the people who ran against him. Matter of fact, there was a guy by the name of the Little General who referred to him as a Negro in every speech, by the name of Stephen A. Douglas. He was an Illinois state senator who referred to Lincoln as a Negro oftentimes. The bus ride to justice, Fred Gray, attorney, pastor, and state representative in Alabama. He's a graduate of the Alabama State Negro College, as it was called, which is now Alabama State University. He just was a brilliant litigator. And it's amazing. I'm going to spend a few minutes on Fred Gray. Put that book back up. I'm going to spend a few minutes. When we live in a time now where I'm hearing people refer to guys like Ben Crump, and it's not a knock on Ben Crump. Ben Crump as America's, the Black America's lawyer. How can Ben Crump be Black America's lawyer and not litigate cases? Cases and systems are not changed by settlements of cash. Systems are changed through litigation and legislation and policy. Ben Crump cannot be Negro America's lawyer. Thurgood Marshall litigated. Fred Gray litigated. When you go down the list of people who change things through policy, through judicial action, and then you take a guy who runs across the country getting settlements and you call him Black America's lawyer, this is how we're losing. This is how we're losing at a high level. Ben Crump is a guy who settles cases for large sums of money. And I know there are people out there that'll say, well, how you hating on Ben Crump? Because nothing is changing when you take the check. Nothing changes when you take the check. Sure, family loses a loved one, they get $20 million. What has changed? Well, probably the lives of the people who got the $20 million, but the systems are still the way they are. And we have to figure out, are we going to stop celebrating people who snatch and grab and gravitate toward people who are making a difference? So when you read about Fred Gray and Thurgood Marshall and all of those gentlemen during the 50s and 60s at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, then you will understand that our country has changed through great litigators, people who went to court, who changed policy through judicial action. Again, thank you so much, everybody. I just want to kind of touch on some things. I'm not done yet. Phil.
Got more? Can you read that?
Okay. Now, this is something very, very interesting. The Slave Bible, select parts of the Holy Bible for the use of the American slave. Now, you can go find the Slave Bible. I'm sure you can probably find it. That book was written by Emmanuel Raffa. But you can find this, I'm sure, probably on Amazon or it's out there. If you read the Slave Bible, Phil, it'll blow your mind. Because what happens is then you understand and start to question religion, Phil. When I first started looking at this, I was like, whoa, hold on. Because they have manipulated religion historically. So when I started reading that the slaves were given a different Bible, and those who realized that the Bible was a different Bible, and religious sects start splitting off. You go all the way back to the level of distortion in the presentation to people was the catalyst. And I still think, quite frankly, that the black church is at the forefront of the struggle of black people in America today. The level of what is being presented and how it's being presented is not helping people. The pie in the sky concept of just I'll get mine and by while others are getting theirs today. And if you go back, I just think that we have to know how we got here to change things. And when you go back to that book, you got to read it. Emmanuel Raffa wrote that book. It's excerpts from the Slave Bible. You will be stunned at what you come across. Phil?
All right. Next one.
Okay, of course, we talked about Claudette Colvin twice.
Yeah.
Twice toward justice. She is the young lady who initially was arrested for not giving up her seat, but she was 15. Many said her skin was too dark, and so they went and got Rosa Parks, who I get it. No, I don't get it, but I get it, and that is how the entire Montgomery bus boycott, the Supreme Court decision that came about to change segregation on buses.
All right.
And this, I started with the ordeal of the presidency. I think this is a must read if you really want to know some of the games that were played in that era. Some of the games that were played are reminiscent of what we see today. But one of the major factors in that era was once you've been called a Negro, it was just a whole different conversation. And you'll be amazed at some of the politicians that were called Negroes for whatever reason, but it was always used to discredit them and their ability to run or represent people.
There's one more, but we didn't get a chance to discuss this one yet.
Okay, go for it.
This one.
Okay, the 5 Negro presidents. I mentioned J.A. Rogers early on. J.A. Rogers has several really good books, but this is one that I found, the 5 Negro presidents. You can find that definitely on Amazon. It is a very quick read. It will blow your mind. It is insightful. And I'll tell you what else it does. It points you in the direction of other literature that you can read to corroborate anything that's written. So you'll get 4 or 5 different places you can go and find information. But that is by J.A. Rogers as well.
Okay. All right, so let's read some of these comments here.
Okay.
All right, from Jonathan Ellis. You're presenting real black history. I learned a lot. Same here, man. All right, this is about regarding Ocoee. The Ocoee massacre, one of the men, Shepard, was my uncle through marriage.
Wow. Thank you, Erlene.
Yeah. From Steve. You know your history. Love that. All right. So you need to teach a class. All right. We got, this is regarding what you were just talking about before.
Check his hush money. All right, Drina.
Yeah. Settlements don't change laws.
Right.
We got, wow, this is powerful. So much gems.
So
I bet you a lot of people that are watching probably did not know majority of the stuff you were saying.
Well, let me just go back to, real quick to Ben Crump. I don't have a problem with Ben Crump. I know Ben. We see each other. We speak. There's nothing personal. I have a problem when people build people up, not for something that they've really done, but for the perception of it. When you go back and look at Thurgood Marshall, Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, and you go read that case. Brown versus the Board of Education changed everything as it relates to education, separate but equal, in this country for black people. Changed everything. It was momentous. It was gigantic. Thurgood Marshall litigated that. You go back and look at the history of Thurgood Marshall before the Supreme Court, before he sat on that bench. He went to court. Great litigators go to court. It is amazing how black folk hold up people who just because they get money and settlements. Nothing has changed. When you take on, I'll take you to Minneapolis, Minnesota, George Floyd. And I watched that case close up. And it was amazing because you see the same people show up at these cases. In the George Floyd case, George Floyd was definitely, you have to understand the intricacies of that case. George Floyd was a victim. He definitely wasn't a hero. And it's amazing to me that they have a statue for George Floyd, but not a statue. This bothers me, y'all. Let me just take a minute, right? George Floyd got a statue before Emmett Till. Emmett Till, a young black kid from the south side of Chicago, goes to visit his family in Mississippi and is viciously murdered by some racist white POSs. Horrible. It was America's conversation. It brought light to what was happening in the Deep South. My family fled the Deep South. But Emmett Till was murdered for allegedly whistling at a white lady who later on her deathbed kind of recanted the story. George Floyd got a statue before Emmett Till. George Floyd wasn't the first one, he was the filmed one. But the history of George Floyd, I look at people's history. I'm not one of these dudes you're going to just at the last minute throw it in front of me and I'm like, oh yeah. Listen, what happened to George Floyd shouldn't have happened. But Emmett Till was viciously murdered. And I don't know if he got honored at the magnitude of George Floyd, Phil. George Floyd was a criminal. Yeah, he lost his life, but he was a criminal. He was not a value to society. I get tired of watching certain people get put on a pedestal for situations that they bring about. That cop was a POS. He was a horrible POS. But let's start with him for a minute. That cop who had his foot on the neck of George Floyd should not have been a cop. The state attorney in Hennepin County, Minnesota, this cop's name had appeared before the state attorney in Hennepin County, Minnesota, more than once, more than twice, more than 5 times for this type of behavior. He was a bad cop. And the state attorney in Hennepin County kept looking the other way. And this is when I tell people, put that on the screen, push your button. The state attorney who looked the other way on that cop more than once, more than twice in Hennepin County, Minnesota, for this type of behavior is Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Missouri, Minnesota. In the midst of George Floyd's death, when America was in uproar because of what we saw on film, this bitch was running for president of the United States and the Negro didn't say nothing. The focus was on the cop, not the attorney who looked the other way. She was the state attorney. She was the state attorney. She could have been got rid of this cop. And then she's running for president. Her name's on some list, short list or whatever the hell. And ain't no one black person like, whoa, ain't you the one? I knew it. Michelle Ross Robinson, put what Michelle just put up there, Phil. Michelle just said the cop was on the watching Klobuchar. Absolutely. And she's a Democrat that was running for president. And she is the person who looked the other way and let this asshole keep being a bad cop. And guess what? She still had black people supporting her. Nobody called her name in Minnesota. Nobody called her name. This is what I'm talking about. It's amazing how we let our enemy pick our enemy. The problem in Hennepin County with bad cops was Amy Klobuchar, the prosecutor, who never went after them. She is still the senator from Minnesota. How dare you put your name in the hat for president in the midst of this, and the Negro didn't even notice. Phil, whose fault is that?
Ours.
Hell yeah. We should have raised our hands like, no, not you. Wasn't you the state attorney? Can we see your record against cops who do this kind of stuff? Not one black person, especially Crump, mentioned this lady's name, and she was the state attorney who looked the other way, not once, not twice, but many times, and had black support. I'm so ashamed of you Negroes sometime, man. Boy, I'm so ashamed of you Negroes. Thank you so much, Sean. Sean say because she was a Democrat. Absolutely. Think about this. The state attorney who keeps letting police get off didn't go after none. Zero. Who's a Democrat. In the midst of this, she's running for office as a Democrat. And the Negro who's burning up the town, don't put her name in the mix, Phil. Hey, this is the lady y'all should be mad at. Everybody focused on the cops. But the lady who looked the other way, the boss, the highest ranking legal official in the county, state attorney, she decided, I don't know what to tell y'all. I'm a senator now. I left. But you were in charge when these names came across your desk time and time again. This is where the confusion comes in, guys. I'm just trying to tell y'all, man, look, we got to do better. We got to know our history. We got to research. We got to read, man. It's amazing. And I'm going to say this. I didn't want to put politics in this conversation, Phil. If that lady had been a Republican, they'd have been dragging her ass down the street. Mm-hmm. They would have dragged her ass up and down the street. She would have definitely been attached to the fact that this cop was let out or looked the other way on numerous times of this kind of behavior. But she was a Democrat. They didn't want to go after her. And then she decides the arrogance that I want to be the top person in the country.
Lazy said he sent you a text.
Man,
a question.
I'll deal with it. Tell Lazy to put his question
it's
on
long
the screen,
here.
man. Ain't no, Lazy be doing too much. We ain't getting ready to play with Lazy. Okay? the point I make is this, dude. The point I make is this. You know, we got to do better. We got to know who's with us and who's not with us. And the way we do that is spend some time, but seek knowledge, man. Seek knowledge. The greatest weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. If you don't think for 1 minute that there's a political party in this country that has pimped the Negro historically, pimped them out with no pushback, then shame on you for not knowing that. The greatest weapon of the oppressor, as Stephen Biko so eloquently said, is the mind of the oppressed. We have to understand how to move in certain spaces. That's all I'm saying. And if we don't, we're going to continue to see these type of things happen. It's politics, definitely, PJ. Total politics. You know what else I wanted to touch on? And I didn't want to go down this road, but there's a great quote that I live by every day, and it's Frederick Douglass. It's a brilliant, brilliant quote. Knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave, Phil.
I have heard that one, yeah.
Knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. We have to seek knowledge. Young kid talking to me the other day, man, and I want to kind of wrap up with this. Graduate from college with honors. Good kid. I hope he does well. And he was telling me about politics. He was like, yeah, Mr. Don, we weren't even able to run for office and yada, yada, yada. And they wouldn't even let us run for office, you know. And I'm saying, young man, where did you get that information from? He was like, that's what I know, man. We couldn't run for office. I'm like, what do you mean? He was like, we couldn't be senators and congresspeople. Man, are you kidding me? Before Reconstruction, we had senators and congresspeople. What are you talking about? Alachua County, Florida. The congressman from Alachua County was a black man in the 1800s, around 1868. Josiah Walls was his name. He was a Republican congressman from Alachua County. But if you also understand that the first 23 congressmen of color, black, black, first 23 were Republicans. And I think it's important, man, that we just do some research and stop letting people fool us. We being got. How amazing it feel that we being got by people that we look straight in the face and we know they getting us. This whole Minnesota George Floyd conversation, the lady that was in charge was campaigning all over the country while they were burning up the city, and not one person said, that's her. She let the police go. Listen, thank you so much, everybody. Look, I'm here on Thursday nights. Man, I came here. I only got an hour to try to get a bunch of stuff out. Hopefully, in the next few weeks, we're going to expand this conversation so I can talk slower. But go find all those books, man. You can come back. The podcast is up. You can go to the podcast. You can pause it and go get these books. And I just want you to know that when I come in here, I'm serious about real conversation. But reading changes lives, man. Knowledge changes lives. Money don't change your life, man. Money may make you more comfortable, but you're still going to be dumb as hell. You can have a whole lot of money and be dumb as hell. I know a lot of those people. What changes your circumstances is knowledge. And it's easy, man. We live in a time when I was a kid, my mama paid all that money for Encyclopedia Britannica. I'd be damned if I wasn't going to read them all. Right. I read all of them. She paid on them for 20 years probably. They got us. But guess what? We had books in the house. I remember when they was red. Remember them, Phil?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I had the first, when Windows 95 came out, I had the first Encyclopedia Britannica on disc.
Yes. So please, I'm telling you, it's easy to grow because you can't grow if you don't know. Knowledge definitely makes a man unfit to be a slave. Thank you so much. Subscribe and like. Tell your friends. Shout out to everybody who watched tonight. Man, I really appreciate y'all. I'm going to get out of here in a minute. Phil, I appreciate you. Shout out to the little white lady up there in the middle of nowhere. Appreciate you so much, Amber. Hey, listen. Subscribe and like. Go follow me on all platforms. Inbox me if you got questions or show topics you want us to hit on. My name is Don Miller, and I'm nobody else. Bye-bye, everybody.